Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate your patronage, and I would love it if you could leave me a 5-star review because that really helps me. And if you could like and share this episode with somebody that you know that may benefit, your friend, your colleague, anyone, I'd really love you to share this podcast, especially if you find value in the Muslim Sex Podcast. Also, I'd love for you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on all my social media. Also, as you probably know, if you've been listening to this podcast, is that I have a practice that is now open in Chappaqua, New York. I see patients for menopause and sexual health, as well as regular gynecology. So if you are looking for a gynecologist that actually spends time with you, that has time to listen to you, then I would invite you to come and see me in my practice, and I'd be more than happy to take care of you. So make sure if you live in the New York area, or even if you don't, come and see me in my office. I'd love to meet you. And also, last but not least, is that I am hosting again my retreat in Morocco for 2025. So if you are looking for a gift for a family member, a friend, yourself, make sure you take a look at our retreat, the Love and Nourish Retreat. It will be held September 19th through the 26th, 2025. Again, this year in Morocco, we will be visiting the same towns. We will be in Marrakesh and Essaouira. And as always, we will be providing information and lectures on menopause, perimenopause, nutrition, and also going for cooking classes as well as excursions. So don't miss out. I know a lot of people were sad when they missed out this past year on the Morocco retreat. So make sure that you go and visit the Love and Nourish Retreat hosted by Caria Retreats. And now onto the episode. I am an American board certified OBGYN, a mom, a Muslim, and I'm talking about sex. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sadaf, and this episode is everything you need to know about having great sex in menopause. I'm with the great Dr. Shannon Chavez. So before we get into it, the first thing I want to make very clear that this is not meant to be any type of medical advice. So if you have any questions about menopause or anything else, make sure you see your healthcare provider. And this is, of course, not any type of religious advice. If you have any questions about your religion, make sure you go see your friendly neighborhood religious leader. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast because I just happen to be a Muslim woman that talks about sex. So welcome back, Dr. Shannon Chavez. How are you? You're in LA.
Yes, thanks for having me. It's been a busy year, lots of exciting new projects going on, but it's so good to be back here talking with you about this, especially this topic. This is really my passion topic right now to talk to women about.
Fantastic. It's a different topic. And as you know, it's really getting a lot of airtime and media. So it's really fantastic. And I'd love to know. So I know you recently did, it was an event called the Pause. And
Yes.
tell me about that. And I'd love to know the insights and what you talked about.
Yes, I mean, this event was great. We had hundreds of women attending, different experts from all different specialties. And that's what I love about the talk with menopause, that it's a holistic approach. You know, it's not just physical symptoms or mental health support. It's a whole body process and approach to taking care of yourself during menopause. This event was empowering. I mean, people were laughing, they were cheering, they were excited, they were talking about products. There were table talks of different topics that women could ask questions and get answers from different experts. So to me, it felt like such a great resource. That's what I'm hearing from so many women. We need resources. We want to take control of our health and be in control of what's going on for us individually. So this event was very empowering. I mean, people were leaving with smiles and new friendships and bonding. And that's what I think we need a lot during our menopause journey is that. And that's what I want to be a part of, definitely.
So why don't you tell those individuals that people watching and listening that may not know who you are, you were on once before here, but I'd love for you to just kind of remind those individuals what you do and what your background is, and then let's get into the topic.
Amazing. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm certified as a sex therapist. I tend to say I'm a specialist in all things sexuality. My work has been helping women, couples with sexual wellness, understanding sexual health. I do a lot of sex education and community outreach to help people have a better relationship with their sexuality. I myself am also a Muslim woman, so I work a lot with people from conservative communities or backgrounds or religious backgrounds and helping them integrate healthy sexuality with their values, their beliefs, their spirituality, and their personhood. So that's a big niche in my practice. And I love my work. As you can see, I get enthusiastic about this work. I feel very grateful to be able to be a voice in the community, to be able to talk about this. And, it's shifted my culture and family, and also to be able to help people have that same experience in their own lives, to get over shame, to overcome their barriers, to feel proud of who they are sexually. That's what we should all be doing.
100%. I love that. And I think it's so important, that you're shifting the narrative of sex positivity, right? Especially in conservative cultures. I feel like that's really kind of a little bit of an uphill battle that we fight. But I think it's really important to have these sex positive individuals, like yourself around so that we can talk about these topics without shame, without stigma, without feeling like what we're discussing is wrong, shameful, dirty, or bad, right? It's about empowerment and education. And I love that you focus on that as well. That's a big passion of mine. And it's so important. And that's the reason why, somebody actually recently suggested that I change the name of the podcast. And I saw where that other person was coming from. And I did consider it. And I was like, maybe I should change the name of the podcast. But then, after much reflection, on my own, I thought, you know what, I'm going to keep it the name that it is because it is a global podcast, and people can go to the podcast, Spotify, wherever they want to go, wherever they get their podcasts, and take a listen and look for a podcast that talk about menopause, perimenopause, sexual health. There's so many out there, so many wonderful physicians that are doing it. But you know what? This niche is a niche that is not served. And it's something that I feel passionate about. And I want more women to give themselves permission to experience pleasure in their relationship. And if they find that the Muslim sex podcast is something that they resonate with, that they can relate to, then, I decided that this is where I wanted to be. And so I've kept the name. And, it is global. There are people, actually, India has the most downloads outside of the US. So even more than the US, people in India are listening to this podcast. So, I kept it the way it is. So I appreciate the work that you do for, transforming the narrative from sex negativity to sex positivity.
Yes. Oh, don't change the name. I love the name of your podcast. Even this morning, I was telling my husband, I'm like, I'm doing the Muslim sex podcast today. And I always love doing this. I mean, these are not taboo topics. And I think bringing access globally as you're doing and reaching people that don't have that maybe in their community or where they come from. That's really, I think, why we do the work that we do. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's get into the topic because I am just so interested and intrigued by the title of the presentation that you had, which was Amazing Sex in Menopause. So tell me all about it. Can't wait to hear it.
yes. Well, first off, I feel like I've been talking about menopause my whole career, and I'm now in my mid 40s, which is interesting because I remember starting my work in women's health and sexual health and talking about menopause at that age. And I remember a woman in the crowd once saying, "What do you know about menopause?"
I
And it really
imagine.
threw me off my game. And I remember thinking, okay, this is a topic that is very personal for women, and to even come out and say amazing sex sometimes pushes people's buttons. What do you mean amazing sex during menopause? But my goal is really to shift the narrative. I think that we have so many negative influences to our menopause journey. That's why I think to be a menopausal woman right now is one of the best times to be a
Oh,
menopausal
yeah.
woman.
Heck
I
yeah.
think even, yeah, generationally, there are so many generations where we just weren't really talking about menopause. It was sort of this end. Even seeing sex and menopause together was not really in anyone's narrative or script. So to me, amazing sex is not meant to be a standard that I set or any professional sets. It's meant to be permission for you as a woman individually to find what that means for you. And I want to help give you permission for that. My main goal is to help people understand that amazing sex has to be something that you take control of. Pleasure is a very personal journey. So it's not about the mechanics or fixing the physical symptoms. That's part of it, but it's really a whole body experience. First, we have to work on our relationship with our body. There are so many different parts to having amazing sex. So I want to really help people understand the process, that it's not a quick fix, that there's not one thing that you're going to do that one day you're going to have amazing sex, but it's about permission and resources and advocating and prioritizing pleasure because there are so many benefits. I think we think of sex as something we're either having or we're not having, but I look at it as, look, even if you don't enjoy every aspect of sex, do it for the health benefits, the mental health benefits, the connection, the intimacy. So that's really what I want to help women do with this topic is see it as so much more than I just have to have more sex to have amazing sex, but there's so many ways to use sexual connection as something that can help you and improve your life.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think that that's really important as well, because, as we get older and, I'll just say that I'm actually a little bit older than you. I feel like this wise old woman now. But anyways, but not that much older, by the way. But anyways, so, I think it's so true what you just said, that it's really important to have a good relationship with your own body. And then only then I feel like can you have a good relationship with somebody else, right? Like, how do you see yourself? How do you, are you, when you are intimate with somebody, are you really in your body or are you spectating, right? How do you feel about yourself? What is your self-esteem like? What is your self-image like? So many women experience sexual dysfunction and they feel like there's something wrong with them, that they're broken or that they'll never have sex again. So many women in my practice will come in and, one of the most common things that I hear, right? So when I'm talking to women about perimenopause, menopause, and all of this stuff, they say, well, oh, menopause, I went through that so many years ago and now I'm on the other side and now I'm doing fine. And I'm like, but there's no end. Like it's, you're in post-menopause until you die. Like that's it, and the things that you were experiencing in perimenopause, early menopause just continues and it sometimes can even get worse, right? We know, especially with the gender urinary syndrome of menopause, if we don't take care of it, then that's going to lead to abstinence. And especially if you're not interested in abstinence, that's what's going to happen because you're having this painful sex, you're getting irritated. Some people get cuts, they have narrowing of the vaginal opening. I mean, all of that happens, if we are not diligent about taking care of our bodies and how we help our bodies. And I think that, really talking about how we feel about ourselves and then taking care of the medical aspect of it. But also, as we know in sexual health, right, you have to take care of the biopsychosocial. So you have to take care of a biological component and then the psychological component and then the social aspect of it. And it all comes together. And you really can't have one without the other. You have to kind of work on all of that stuff.
Yes, yes. And it is, as you were saying that, it reminded me that we think of sex from a very heteronormative perspective. We're
Yeah.
thinking about, even painful sex. When I talk to women about painful sex, it's usually connected to penetrative activity. But I think so much of sex, we're missing out on so much more of what sex actually is. We're looking past the mechanics. We can learn about the connection, the sensuality, what people are missing. And I find that a lot of women during menopause are bored with the type of sex that they were used to having, right? The routines of this type of sex, or they've sort of settled for, not really focusing on their pleasure. And this is an opportunity in your life to really make sex more for you. And I think women's sexuality has always been complicated in our society. I always think of hysteria, right? When women were actually sexually frustrated, they were diagnosed with hysteria. They were wanting too much sex, and now they're not wanting enough sex. And there's all of these, hypoactive sexual desire, all these labels and terms to define the shifts and changes that are really normal in our sexuality. So I think that creates so much stigma and it makes women want to give up. And I'm in my 5th year of perimenopause, so I'm actually dealing with some of those ups and downs myself. And so I'm experiencing low libido, and I know all the tools and I know the things to do. And it's such a personal journey. You have to be okay with going through those changes. And I think, as you were saying before, menopause is looked at as a quick stage and then you're done. But you made a good point. It's really this era of the golden age of our life, right? The age of our life where we're past certain points in our, reproductive age. We're not having children, we're not raising children, and we might be at a point where we can really focus on ourself. And what a great time to redefine what sex means for you and learn really even what low libido means. For me, I had to look at that personally. What does it mean that I have low libido? Is it relational? Am I not loving my body? Am I not taking care of my body? And you may know this as a doctor as well. Sometimes we are great at giving the advice to others, but sometimes I struggle with the practice myself of doing the things that I know are important for self-care and sexual self-care. So that's why I say permission a lot. We have to say it's okay for us to struggle, but it's also okay for us to do the right thing, to take the steps to improve, because it's going to benefit us in many different ways.
Oh, 100%, all the time. I mean, I think about Lori Brado, right? And she talks about better sex through mindfulness. And so that's something that I really incorporate, myself. And I think that, and I don't know, and like you said, right? Like what really is low libido? Maybe something that, you consider as low libido is actually normal libido for somebody else, right? So you really have to define what is low libido for you and whether or not it's causing distress in your relationship. Because if it's not really causing distress for you personally, then it's really not a problem. Right. So that's how we define that hypoactive sexual desire disorder, is that it causes you distress. And I think that if you're working on those things and if you're trying to work on your relationship, I think that that says a lot. And I think that we need to acknowledge those wins and realize that, we are taking the effort and taking the steps to a better relationship with not only ourselves, but also our partner. And, when you talked about boring sex, right? Like, yeah, right.
Yes.
We get stuck. It's the monotony. It's like the same thing over and over again. And how do you change that, right? And you have to become curious and you have to see, what is it that I want to change? What is it that I like? What is it that I don't like? And I love menopause because I think that at this point, you're not worried about getting pregnant when you don't want to be pregnant, right? I think the women really, and there was that New York Times article, I'm sure you saw it too, about that woman talking about having the best sex of her life
Mhm.
in menopause, right? Because she's so many things that she was worried about before, she's no longer worried about. So many things that, maybe she was prioritizing her partner's pleasure and not her own. And now she's owning her own pleasure and she's not willing to settle, right? She has that agency now that she feels empowered to tell her partner what she likes, what she doesn't like, so that she can enjoy this act that maybe before she just wasn't.
Yes. I mean, that's important in my work, is to not let menopause be a scapegoat for not having a great relationship with sexual health and wellness. And it's important that we have the tools and the ways to make that happen, to address some of the things that you just named, reflecting on what was before, looking at how we're communicating, not only to partners, but ourselves. And that's where I often have women start, is starting with the relationship with yourself. It doesn't matter if you have a partner or not. Amazing sex starts with you and really knowing what you like. Women are so passionate and creative, and that's always my goal, is bringing that into sex. And that's where I see libido really make a shift and change. And there are so many things that I think we're not doing in sex that are important for the foundation of great sex. Often, yes, having variety and routine, but safety is important, feeling safe to be able to talk about our desires. I see that so much in my practice, that it's not just about a lack of desire. It's that when I approach this topic with a partner, or even when I think about it myself, what I truly want to feel good, I feel shame, or I'm embarrassed, or I don't know how to actually make this happen in reality so that I can experience what I want sexually. And so that's what I love in my work, is to help women go through that process and find that and not only acknowledge it, but then give themselves permission to experience that in their sexual lives. And I love the creative aspect. That's the fun part. And that doesn't mean novelty and toys. That could be. But sometimes it's just being able to know yourself, know your energy. When do you feel that kind of burst of desire to be in a pleasure place or a play place? Those are the things that I think are sometimes missing from our conversation about great sex. Is it's really adult play. It's our time to be adventurous and open and embodied. And I would love to kind of help women get there without the blocks and barriers that many of them face.
And you're so right. There's so much. Well, first of all, I think there's that internalized shame, right? There's that sex negativity. It could be, maybe, either, if you experience trauma or abuse, that's definitely a reason why somebody may not, be interested. There's also, that you just grew up with this sex negativity and that's all you've known your whole life, right? And you don't give yourself that permission to experience pleasure because you're always in the back of your mind, you're always thinking that it's wrong, it's dirty, it's shameful. And how can I even have that conversation with somebody else when I can't even really say those words without feeling, some discomfort myself, right? There are women that have never looked at their genitals because they think that it's wrong and don't really know that, that there are three holes, right? That there's a urethra, there's a vagina, there's a rectum. And so many women that are older, I will end up teaching them that because they've never looked. They don't even know, they think that where they, go to the bowel, right, where they have a bowel movement from, that's where they also had their baby from. So it's really interesting. And I think it really goes back to perhaps sex education and maybe the lack thereof. Sometimes when, especially children of immigrants, aren't allowed to go to sex education because the parents are fearful of what their children might learn and they don't know and they don't understand and they were never taught. So they don't teach their children, right? So there's so many things that I think, people have to work through and figure out. And it all starts, I think, with, right, what we talked about is giving yourself permission, allowing yourself to just learn, to empower yourself and then decide, how you want to be and pass that along to your children if you have children or, within your community. And I feel like sometimes there is a little bit of pushback, right? Sometimes people are like, oh my God, I can't believe she's talking about sex so openly, and somebody said to me in my community, they're like, wow, what a great job you have. All you do is talk about sex all day. And I was like, that's not all I do, but okay. So there is a little bit of that.
I'm glad you bring up that, talking about amazing sex doesn't always mean we're talking about all of the positives. There are a lot of things that really are important to acknowledge: trauma, lack of education, stigma, shame. And sometimes those are some of the more challenging things to not only admit that are going on in our lives, but that are part of sexual wellness. I think that we think of wellness as sort of the positives or when things are going well, but those areas where we struggle or we might go through changes inform us and really teach us so much about ourselves. And I love that sexuality never ages. I love that no matter what age or stage we're at, our bodies are capable of pleasure and we can experience so many things. But and this is where menopause comes in, we've learned that there's sort of an ending or shift or things are we're going to lose certain aspects. But I think that's why I said I don't want menopause to be the scapegoat. I've actually seen that either sex stays about the same or it improves during menopause. I haven't seen too many experiences in my work where it gets worse. But what I do find, there's fear around it getting worse because of the stigma and societal messages. And I think that's so important. I think it's important for women to hear that it can get better and improve, and that, like the article that we talked about, that people are having some of the best sex of their life during this time. I think that's so important for people to talk about that and know that that is a possibility, and that even with lack of education, as you were saying, we can learn about we're always learning about sexuality. I always say, myself included, even as a sex therapist who's constantly reading and talking about it, as you do as well, we're still learning, right? There's still things that we learn and newness to our own awareness, and then what we're learning and teaching our clients and patients. So I think that that's also something that we need to acknowledge and embrace, is that this is a constant learning in our life. We will be learning about sex sexuality for the rest of our lives, and that can be exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it's fantastic that you teach. And, I think it's great when people are able to teach what they know. I teach second year medical students here in New York. And actually, they are third year medical students that are rotating with us. And I teach them about menopause and perimenopause and sexual health. And, that was something that I never got as a student. And so I think I'm really passionate about teaching them about female sexual dysfunction and about menopause and perimenopause because of the whole WHI study and all this stuff. We never got it even as residents, and so it's really important that we learn this and then that we pay it forward and teach students and teach other practitioners so that they too can also learn and help others.
And teach each other. I mean, what I've learned in I'm Latina and I grew up, and it was interesting. My parents really shifted their what relationship they wanted to have with their children. They were younger parents, so they didn't want to have these same really conservative messages that their parents taught them growing up in a very conservative religious household. So they were a bit more open and they wanted to open conversations. But still to this day, my mom and I talk about all of these things. We'll talk about vibrators and self-pleasure and lubricants and moisturizers. And I think it's also important to think about, we can talk to our friends, we can talk to our family, we can teach our parents, our parents can again be open to learning, but that it's that there's something about that bonding and acceptance of learning information and being able to sometimes heal some of the generational shame that we don't recognize as there, or maybe we've changed our views or not as conservative as where we grew up, but we're shifting and changing those generational messages just by having those conversations and being open to learning, even if it embarrasses us. And I did this whole video series on I talked to my mom about sex, and it was really fun to kind of go into just generational teachings and how and we talked about sex and menopause, because I think there's so many similarities in what's not talked about and what happens when we sort of suffer in silence, and the questions we have, and normalizing that these are part of our lives no matter how we're experiencing it, and we need to have those conversations.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I think it's fantastic that you had that conversation with your mom. Wow, I don't think I could have that conversation with my mom, but I think it's fantastic that you were able to. And I think that so many women that I see as patients, will say to me, well, I don't do that anymore, as if it's like something you give up, like alcohol or something, like, oh, I just don't drink anymore, and they'll be like, oh, sex. Well, after menopause, it's all done, not using that anymore. And I think that's unfortunate. I think that there is this association of menopause and abstinence that pervades society. And I think that's really, too bad, because I think that now actually women as we're, getting closer into menopause, we're like, nope, that's not going to happen with me, right? Like that's not going to be the end of my sexuality or, how I experience sex. It's not going to end after menopause, right? It's only for a lot of women, our generation, that are sex positive. I feel like they feel that, more empowered during this time. And they feel like, no, this is actually going to be the best time of my life. So I think it's really important to, help change that narrative and teach women that it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, if they desire, if that's what they want, then absolutely it's, 100% they can do that. But it's not something that is like a written law that has to happen that way, and that they can definitely decide and change it if they want.
And don't give up. There's not one thing that works for everyone. And so that's why I think it's important to be your best health advocate. Know the hormones, maybe experiment with some things, try some creams, try some of these options. You have to find out what works for you. And I see in my practice, people will try something, it doesn't work. Oh, I'm just giving up, or, it's not going to happen, or it's frustrating. I think I want to normalize that process for women, because it does take a lot of trial and error, trying things out, communicating different things. It's a process and a commitment that I want I want women to prioritize because it's important, because nowhere else in society are we going to get that level of permission or resource. We have to kind of find for ourselves what works. And there's a lot of conflicting messages. That's why I like doing these big events where you have different panels of experts, because you start to see all the misinformation that we've heard over the years around, what works, what doesn't work, what to be afraid of, and risks. And I think all of that information just creates so much not only shame and overwhelm, but where do I start? Or it's too much work, right? I don't even want to go through the process of figuring this out. And I think also that, sex is about quality experiences, not just a frequency or quantity or rhythm around how many times we're having sex. Or I think it's more of a, quality experiences that we're creating that are fulfilling us, that are helping us feel better about ourselves overall.
100%. And I think that, that is something really, really important, what you just said about the quality, right? And not the quantity. And I think that, so many women that I see in the clinic or the office, they'll say that, I just don't feel an attraction to my partner anymore, or that my libido is really low and I just want him to finish. Once we start this, having sex, I just want him to finish so that I can just go and do my own thing, right? I'm not really even enjoying it. I'm not. And then and then I'll have them pause and I'll ask them if they are experiencing any pleasure at all in anything that they're doing. And they'll stop and they'll say, no, not at all. Right. And they'll say, I just don't feel anything. And then, and then we get into that, like, how can they really feel something, and about mindfulness and about sensate focus and all of those things. But I think that a lot of times women they have like what is called obligatory sex, right? That they just do, have this performative action and just for their partner and not for themselves. And I think that when women start owning their own pleasure and realizing that they have, that they should really expect pleasure and want pleasure if they want it, but that they're able to have it, then I think that that really changes things for them. But I think that when they see sex as something for somebody else, that's when I think that there's just no pleasure in it.
It is. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. It does feel like a task or an obligation or an expectation. And there are so many expectations around sex. Even when I hear clients talk about that, I can feel the heaviness of those conversations. All of this has to happen, and there's so much else going on, or I'm taking care of everyone. And that's why I think self-pleasure is so important, because self-pleasure is really your opportunity to have some privacy and time to explore your body, to find out what works, and to romance yourself. I think romancing yourself during this time in your life is so important. And that could start with simple non-sexual acts, grooming and taking care of yourself, feeling good and confident, or trying a new hairstyle, or dressing up just for you one day. Those types of things are so important for how they impact our motive. And then that starts you permission to step into self-pleasure. I work with many women that will look at me with wide eyes when I talk about self-pleasure and masturbation, like, oh gosh, she's going to tell me the vibrator. Oh, well, what am I going to have to do? That feels like work. And sometimes I don't even start with any of that. It's about just creating space for you and you alone. And that I think helps what's going on in partnered sex. Because partnered sex is complicated. Those dynamics are what we're doing in our day-to-day life become integrated into our sex. So if we're feeling a power struggle or conflict, or things that we don't agree on, or it's hard to be heard or validated, that's all going to come into our sexual dynamics. So having space on your own first to know what you want and be able to know how to communicate that before working that into your partner dynamic helps so much. But often we don't do that, or we've never taken the time to do that, so it feels overwhelming. But I want to tell women out there that, hey, let's simplify that. It really just starts with what makes you feel good and having good boundaries, not doing things we don't want to do sexually. It feels obligatory. It's going to lead to a comforting being able to know that we should never feel pressure to have sex. Without sex, that's like what I tell people. We can live without sex. We are not going to die. Your husband will not die if he doesn't have sex. Connection is important. And I find for many women that the connection, the emotional intimacy, the things that do fulfill other needs are not being met. So, of course, their sexual self is not getting turned on. They're not feeling safe and comfortable. There's not a flow or rhythm that feels comfortable without it feeling mechanical. So, we have to address some of those issues before you're going to have the experience that you want.
Such great information, Shannon. And I completely agree with you, right? That, whatever is, and this is what I always tell patients, is that whatever is happening outside of the bedroom, just, you're not talking about difficult issues, right? The same thing is going to happen inside the bedroom. Things don't, turn on and off as you carry all that with you. Or if there's like resentment or anger with your spouse, you're definitely not going to feel any type of, I don't know, sexual feelings with somebody that you're angry at, right? So I think what you just talked about, I think it starts with creating that emotional intimacy, which then, can lead to physical intimacy if you want it. But it starts with that emotional intimacy and doing simple things like just even holding hands, taking a walk, doing, making dinner together, or going for a hike, or doing something where it's just the two of you, where you're experiencing something that brings you closer together. Will create that emotional intimacy, which will then eventually lead to, if you want, perhaps, physical intimacy, or if you don't want, but at least then when you have that emotional intimacy and you have that safety, and I think that's a key word that you've used. And I think that's so, so important, is when you feel safe, right? When you have that feeling of safety and emotional intimacy, then it allows you to be open to some sort of sexual stimuli if you want it to be. And I think what's also important is that realizing that the arousal sometimes can occur before the desire, right? That was that whole human sexual response cycle that Rosemary Basson created. And, and that to know that you don't have to have that spontaneous desire, what we see in the movies with people ripping off their clothes, right? It doesn't have to be like that, that can have that arousal and that desire can come afterward. And then that can help to build on that emotional intimacy.
Exactly. I think we minimize how important bonding is for sex. I mean, sex is really just one part of our bonding and intimacy. And so we focus so much on sex. But what I find is most people don't even know how to define sex. What is sex? What's amazing sex for you? And they'll say, well, it might be intercourse or this, but the bonding, when I hear the definition of sex, I don't hear much about bonding. And bonding is so important for safety, for us to release the chemicals in our brain that help us feel comfortable and present. So that's usually where I focus in sex. Sometimes I even take sex off the table for a while. Whatever your definition or idea of sex is, we need to take that off the table and build a foundation for bonding and intimacy to be comfortable. And then we'll get to the pleasure part or the sex, different sexual behaviors and acts. But often if we're with sex, I just feel the cooker in the room. It feels so heavily weighted around expectation and obligation and a lot of fear of conflict and disappointment. So I think building bonding into sex is so important. Bonding behaviors. I love doing this in my practice because there are so many things that get people laughing and having fun and breaking the walls down. And that's important for sex because we want to remember sex should be fun and playful. And when I hear how people are experiencing sex, I feel that it's missing that. It's not fun. It feels heavily loaded with so many emotions and feelings. And that's when and again, it's okay to not want sex. That's okay as well. But also, I think when we reframe it and have a way to experience it, that it fulfills us in that way and can feel bonding and connecting, there can be much more desire there. And as you're saying, responsive desire has to have certain ingredients for that to happen. Its presence is so important, slowing down, even doing some of those activities that you mentioned in non-sexual ways, space. I notice this a lot with my couples that have children or that don't have much space for self-care or time alone, and they're having difficulty finding time and connection sexually. It makes sense. You're barely having enough time to take care of yourself and then feeling the obligation to take care of a partner's needs. It makes sense that there would be a lack of desire or drive. there.
Right, absolutely. And yeah, and I'm sure you've seen the studies also that when sex becomes a chore, people no longer want it, right? It's just one more thing on the list of things to do. And anytime something is a chore, it just takes all the fun out of it, right? And I like how you emphasize that sex should be playful and fun and right, that you can be curious about it. And I think that when you bring that aspect into it, right, then it doesn't feel like such a heavy burden and it doesn't feel like something that you have to do. And it takes away the expectations and, the fact that, oh, maybe I need to, have an orgasm at the end of this, or maybe, it takes out the performance issue, right? And so when you can just be present and just enjoy maybe just the taste, the texture, the touch, right? Without putting so much pressure on what the end result has to be, then I find that sometimes is more enjoyable for people than to think that there's, something that has to happen at the end of this, which can create a lot of anxiety and stress for individuals.
Definitely. I always say orgasm is a side effect of great pleasure. So it's something that happens. It's a reflex. It's not a goal, but I think we lose the process of that. The pleasure and presence of sex is not there. It becomes so mechanical around acts and so many things are lost in some of our kind of primal intimacy, the touching, the grinding, the caressing, the kissing, the things that I know bring a lot of pleasure to women are not happening during sex. Even the way sex is initiated, I think, can be a problem because if you have a partner that's just sort of rolling over at the end of the night and saying, "Hey, you want to have sex," rather than there being a real process of kind of bringing that attention, getting the attention, feeling attracted and desired. I think the dance of sexual intimacy can be off quite often for couples, and it becomes something very left brain. Do we want to have sex? Yes or no, rather than it being about really expressing or showing our desire for one another or creating a space for play in our lives for one another. And so that's why when I'm working with couples, I really try to get into where are they having that fun and play and presence in their life? And can we bring that into sexual dynamics to improve what they're experiencing sexually? And often there's an important correlation there. Oh, when we're doing this stuff, we're more adventurous, or we feel more equal, or we're getting mutual pleasure and enjoyment from what we're doing. And wanting to bring that into a sexual space can help improve their dynamics tremendously.
Yeah, no, I love all that. So, I'd love to know what you think are the three key things that somebody listening to this podcast today can take away from this in terms of having the most amazing sex during menopause. What do you think are three things that you absolutely have to do or have?
First, take control of the narrative, because if the narrative feels negative or overwhelming, it's going to feel like an uphill battle and burden rather than something that can enhance and improve your life. Also, to think about sex as an integral part of our health and wellness. So and it's not about the frequency again, but sex has so many health benefits for your body image, your skin, there's so many things that our mood, our mental health. And so I want people to see it as an integral part of health rather than this off part thing that we're either doing or not doing. And also to not think of it as just something that we do, but it's an experience. It's part of our life in many ways. Our sexuality is always a part of us, whether we're having sex or not. So learning that relationship is so important to overcome a lot of the barriers that we all have. And I think lastly, I want to just normalize sexual concerns. I think we hear dysfunction and these different terms and experiences, and that makes us feel broken or that something's wrong and we have to fix it or throw a medication at it or do this or do that. I want women to feel really empowered to know that we all have concerns. We will continue having concerns and that there are many solutions to these concerns, but we do need to talk about it. That's why I think these platforms are important, that we're talking about it, not just clinically, but also as women going through this. I also want women to know that this isn't just information. This this comes from real life experience, and that the more we can support each other, the better our experiences can be, and that we can get help and resources no matter where you're at. So that's, I think, so important that you're not alone. And there are, many people out there that are able to help, but also we need to experiment and find out what works for us. So if one or two things doesn't work, don't quit the journey, keep trying and keep, again, empowering and giving yourself permission.
I love that. And I always love to give women hope and people listening. So I love ending on that note because I think that was very hopeful and so important, the work that you do, and so important that we let others know that definitely this is a very important conversation and that, you are not alone. And I think that by having these type of conversations, you build a community of other people and individuals and practitioners that are, all trying to do the same thing, which is empower and educate. And I think that that is so important in all phases of our life, but especially in this one, that perimenopause, menopause, that's been neglected for so long that now it's really coming to the forefront. So I think it's really important to have women such as yourself talking about it and telling women that, it doesn't need to end if you don't want it to end, right? Sexuality doesn't end when you become menopausal. It can be the beginning. It can be a renaissance. And that's, if you want it to be. And if you, listen and go to people talking about it, then you feel empowered and have agency. So I think it's really important that we do that. So for those people that are watching and listening and are like, oh my God, Shannon is so fantastic. How can I get in touch with her? How can I, go and get some help from her? How can they reach you?
Yes, you can go to my website, drshannonchavez.com. I offer for any interested potential client a consultation over the phone to answer questions. I know even sex therapy can be very intimidating, the idea of it. I would like to help people understand what it is, what it isn't, and also how it can help. So feel free to reach out. Even if you have questions, comments, I'm also on social platforms at Dr. Shannon Chavez. So even though we're being censored very heavily on our social platforms as sex educators,
We are.
incredibly frustrating. We're still out there. We're still doing the work. So feel free to reach out. If you have questions, I almost guarantee you someone else is going through the same thing or has had similar questions. So definitely empower yourself to get the right resources, because I do believe change can happen no matter where you're at.
I love it. Thank you so much. You are totally amazing. And I'm so grateful that you were able to come on again onto this podcast. And we're just two Muslim women, right? Changing the world.
One orgasm at a time. Yes.
That's right. That's right. So, well, we are done here, and it's been real and really intimate. And remember, this is, of course, not any type of medical or religious advice. If you have any questions, please reach out to individuals that can support you. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast. So thank you for listening to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a review, share and like the podcast. And if you leave me a review, I'd love to shout you out on social media. So be sure that you share it with all your friends. And thanks for listening.